Hello YouTubers, November 21st, 2014, Chuck Holler. Okay, this could be a part one, it just depends. What we're going to talk about today is how multiple timelines are all pointing towards a single date. Now what does that date mean? I'm not sure. I'm not saying it's the rapture, the beginning of the tribulation, the revealing of the Antichrist. All I know is that multiple timelines are all pointing towards one particular date. Now, I spent most of my life in marketing in the secular world, and there were certain trends that you would follow, and then there was a thing called a mega trend. For instance, the baby boomers have controlled our economy since they were baby boomers. So in the 1950s, after World War II, there were more cowboy suits and Barbie dolls produced than any other time in history. As we moved into the 60s, more elementary schools were built, then more high schools were built as we moved on, and all through this timeline, the baby boomers controlled the economy. You got into college, then all of a sudden, the baby boomers, they got healthy. They got health conscious, let's put it that way. So instead of Rolling Stone being their favorite magazine, it was health cookbooks. There were more gyms built in the 80s than had ever been produced before. And so now what you're getting is you're getting 2 or 3 different trends turning into a mega trend. And I said 20 years ago, I said, listen, I said, anybody who has the insight and has time to wait, 20 years from now, when you look on television, it's going to be all about pharmaceutical commercials, adult diapers, anything there is to make the baby boomers happy. And they are kicking and screaming, trying not to get old. So what we're going to talk about today are, it's a mega timelines, super timelines. And I'm going to start off this one with a word that probably 2 months ago nobody even heard. It's called Smitah, the Smitah. My last video, I think was called My Life is a Smitah. Now, Smitah is the Hebrew word for sabbatical. And for 15 years, I've listened to different teachings. I've read articles on the sabbatical years. But it never really clicked until Jonathan Cahn's book about Mystery of the Smitah came out. And it all came together. So I'm going to use the Hebrew word in my teaching today called Smitah, because it had an effect on me, and I would like it to have an effect on you. What the Smitah is, it's like a sabbatical. You have a Sabbath of days. You know, God said on the 7th day rest. Well, on the 7th year, we're supposed to rest, and that's called a Smitah. And basically with your agriculture, because they were a very highly agricultural society, so you were not allowed to plant, harvest, no weeding, no pruning, no buying and selling. I mean, the land was to truly rest. You could water a little bit if you needed to save some fruit trees or vines or what have you, but no active agricultural work was to be done. And then, of course, what happened was that Israel didn't listen. So in 586 BC, God will get his, and he made them rest for 70 years when he let Babylon come in, and he took them back to Babylon, and for 70 years. So even though we have all these timelines moving towards the same dates, that reminds me of Daniel. You know, Daniel knew about the 70 years, and he had been counting all those years, and yet on his 70th birthday, nothing happened. And it was several weeks later until the Lord decided to send them back. And why the Lord delayed, I'm not sure. I don't know if the scripture is clear on that. But he did. So sometimes, even though everything points towards a date, it's, you know, you can't put God in a box. He'll come out of the box every single time. But this teaching on the Smitah, you know, it really brought it to life when you could look at your life around you and you can see how it's affected it right now. And right after the Twin Towers in 2001, that was a Shemitah year. And on Elul 29, which is the last day of the month Elul in the Hebrew calendar, and that's the night before Tishra 1, which most Americans have heard of Rosh Hashanah. It's the Hebrew New Year. So the night before Elul 29 is and then every 6 years it's the Shemitah. Well, something happened that day, because the Shemitah also means the breaking down of, or it could be restoration also, depending on where you're at in with God. But then it was a breaking down, because our stock market took its biggest plummet in history, volume-wise, and it crashed 7%. And a lot of sevens are going to tie in with this here, because that's God's signature number. 7 years later, of course, there's a 7 again. Shemitah, Elul 29, down to the same exact day, even to the hour. The stock market again takes its biggest plummet. It's even larger now, because for some reason, after it takes its plunge, the stock market starts to climb over a 6-year period. And then on the Shemitah year, if judgment is what is in line, it takes its fall. So 2008, it falls again, 777 points. There's those sevens again, and especially 3 sevens. So this has got everybody looking towards the next third 7, which is September 13th, 2015. A lot of people are going to not have their money in the stock market on this day. Now, this happens to be a Sunday, so you've got to back up to the previous Friday, which is going to be September 11th. Doesn't that sound familiar? 911. It's going to be interesting to see what happens on that day. Why does God look at 3 sevens? You know, in Revelation, you've got, 3 sets of sevens. They are bowls, trumpets, vials. You have to understand the tribulation period is a 7-year period, because it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. Now, Jacob, his name was changed to Israel, which means Prince of God. Israel, El means God. And when he went to get his wife, he had to work 7 years as a bounty to pay for his wife. Well, after the wedding night, he wakes up the next morning and she uncovers the veil off her face, and it's not his beloved Rachel, it's Leah. And he freaks out because he's worked 7 years for her. I mean, he freaks out so bad he wants to almost kill Laban, who is the father-in-law. But Laban, he backs up immediately. No. He goes, we just had to get rid of the oldest daughter first. It's our customs. You can have Rachel for 7 more years of work, but you can have her now. And I'll trust you to work the 7 years. So he works the 7 more years for Rachel. There's 2 sevens. And then, of course, now he needed something. He's got almost a dozen children, a couple wives. So he makes a deal with Laban to work 7 more years for himself. And, of course, we all know the story. He tells Laban, I'll take all the spotted goats, because there were just very few on a percentage. Most of them were solid colors. But God was blessing him. And so a couple years go by and they're all spotted. And Laban throws a fit and he goes, okay, I'll switch it back. You can have the spotted. I'll take. Well, again, they all become solid colors, because the blessing is on Jacob. And so bad that by the end of the 7 years, Jacob had to flee for his life with Laban's own daughters and grandchildren. He was so mad that the Lord had blessed Jacob. And so that was a very time of tribulation for Jacob. And so we see now the tribulation period, when it comes up, it's going to be a time of, it's Jacob's trouble. It's the time of Israel's trouble. I'm not sure where America is going to be in the tribulation, but most of it will probably take place over in the Middle East. Unfortunately, America might have to be out of the way for that to happen. So, what I want to do today is I want to show you that this Shemitah year, there was a time when it was every every 7 Shemitahs, when you have 7 times 7, that's 49, then the following year is called a Jubilee year. Now this is a time when all debts were canceled, all people went back to their original lands. I mean, it was just the name says it all. Jubilee, it was, it's a Jubilee year. If we track back, and because we could never really pinpoint the Jubilees, we thought we knew what they were, but with Jonathan Cahn's discovery of the Shemitahs, we can now pinpoint the Jubilees pretty accurate. If you go back to, let's go back 2 Jubilees, 1917, World War I. The Ottoman Empire had been in power for 400 years. It was a Muslim dynasty. General Allenby from the British decides to go into Israel and to redeem them. They fly overhead, pass out a bunch of flyers. They drop them from an airplane that says, you know, General Allenby's going to be marching with his army and whatnot. Well, the Turks and the Islam, the Muslims, they misread what it said, and they thought it said Allah Nabi, which meant Allah's prophet of judgment. And they just set their weapons down and all ran away. So General Allenby walks in without firing a shot, and he takes Israel. So for the first time in 400 years, you have a nation in charge of Israel who was favorable to the Jewish people, and that was a restoration, the start of a restoration for Israel, because before the next Jubilee happened, they had become a state, and the British people walked away, and they became their own nation. 19 years after that was the next Jubilee, and that was 1967. And in 1967, they gained Israel as their capital again. The Temple Mount, for the first time in 2,000 years, they're able to walk there again. So, 1945 is also a Shemitah year. The United States becomes a superpower for the first time. All these other nations have fallen because it was a time of judgment for them. And then 4 Shemitahs later, 1973, because of America's actions, the Shemitah became a judgment on America. We lost, to the day that we won World War II, to the day we lost our first war, which was the Vietnam War in 1973. We had legalized abortion. We had done some things, and that was a judgment for America, and it's continued to be a judgment ever since, because we've taken prayer out of school. Now we have same-sex marriage, and Lord help us, Lord help us. I've made a couple notes here. We'll call them show notes, because I don't want to forget anything today. This is too important. What I want to do, you know, I mentioned September 13th. Now, let me throw a disclaimer in here real quick. I am not setting a date for the rapture, folks. People are going to walk away and see this and say, Chuck Collar said the rapture was coming in September. No, I'm not. And matter of fact, the date, September 13th, 2015, is not the date that all these timelines are converging on. You're going to have to tune into part 2 to hear that date. But there are at least 6 timelines that are all pointing towards a particular date. And what does that mean? That means something pretty big is going to happen. Could it be the rapture? Absolutely. The rapture could happen tonight. Your rapture could happen before this video is over. Your heart could stop beating. My heart could stop beating. We never know. So, you know, it's funny how people say, I'm not worried about the rapture. Well, neither am I. I'm excited about a rapture. What a cool thing to have a glorified body and to all of a sudden be immortal instead of just an eternal being. So anyway, I want to tie in. I've talked about the Shemitah, but I'm going to tie in some of the other signs. You know, Genesis 1:14 says that he put the sun and the stars and lights in the sky for signs. And I want to show you how those signs tie in with these signs, and they all point towards the same date. And so please tune in, because you're not going to want to miss what this date is and how all these signs are pointing towards that same date. God bless.